23 years ago, a family disappeared without a trace, until a forgotten necklace revealed the truth. Matt Gibson zipped his weatherproof jacket higher as the October wind cut through the trees. 3 weeks into this surveying job, and he was still finding reasons to hate it. The Vermont wilderness had turned hostile with the changing season, transforming from postcard-perfect foliage to a maze of skeletal branches and unexpected rain showers. "Just map the forgotten forest nobody's seen in decades," his boss had said, waving a hand dismissively. "Easy money from the state. The old billionaire who owned it died, left it to Vermont for preservation. Standard boundary work." Matt checked his GPS unit against the faded paper maps he'd brought as backup. Technology had a way of failing in these dense woods, where cell service disappeared and satellites struggled to penetrate the canopy. His boots sank into the carpet of decaying leaves as he pushed deeper into the property line that separated two sections of the former Dwyer estate. Carson Dwyer. Even in death, the man's name carried weight in these parts. A tech investor turned recluse who had bought up thousands of acres in the late 90s, then vanished behind gates and "no trespassing" signs. The locals had stories about him. Some said he was preparing for the millennium collapse that never came, others whispered about experiments or tax evasion. Matt didn't care much for gossip, but after 3 weeks alone with only his thoughts and the occasional radio call to his office, even Dwyer's ghost made for interesting company. His surveying equipment beeped, signaling the next marker point. Matt stabbed a bright orange flag into the soil, marking the spot. According to his calculations, he was nearing the eastern border of what his maps labeled Sector 7, a particularly remote section that jutted against state forest land. That's when he noticed it, a pattern in the trees that didn't belong. Matt had spent enough time in forests to know that nature rarely grew in perfect geometric lines. Yet ahead of him stood a line of oaks and maples that formed an almost perfect rectangle, as if framing something long since removed. Setting down his equipment, he approached the formation. "What were you hiding out here, Mr. Dwyer?" Matt murmured, running his hand along the bark of one massive oak. The tree had grown around something metal, a fence post, perhaps. Decades old, based on how deeply it had been swallowed by the living wood. The area inside the tree rectangle was sunken slightly, as if the ground had collapsed inward. Matt pulled out his collapsible shovel, standard equipment for removing obstacles to his surveying work, and began clearing away the layers of leaves and debris. 20 minutes of digging revealed the rotted remnants of what might have been a small structure, a cabin or shed. The wood had long since deteriorated, leaving only rusty nails and the faint outline of a foundation. Matt photographed everything meticulously, a habit from his earlier work on archaeological surveys. Something about this place felt important, though he couldn't explain why. As he worked his way around the perimeter, Matt's boot caught on an exposed tree root, sending him sprawling forward. His hand shot out to break his fall, plunging into the hollow base of the largest oak tree. The sensation of cool metal against his fingertips made him freeze. Carefully, Matt withdrew his arm and peered into the hollow. Wedged against the inside of the tree was a rusted tin box, the kind that might once have held cookies or holiday gifts. Using his pocket knife, he pried it open, half expecting to find nothing but mold and insects. Instead, nestled on a bed of disintegrated fabric, lay a child's silver necklace. The pendant was tarnished but intact, a delicate butterfly with a name engraved across its wings. Lila B. Matt lifted the necklace carefully, watching it catch the filtered sunlight. Something about the name tugged at his memory, some half-forgotten headline or conversation. Lila B. He repeated, trying to place the name. Then it hit him. Bishop. The Bishop family case. 23 years ago, the Bishops had vanished without a trace from their home in Burlington. Harvey and Marian Bishop, along with their children Ben and Lila, had simply disappeared one weekend. Their car remained in the driveway, dishes half-washed in the sink. No bodies were ever found, no ransom demanded. The case had become something of a local legend, the kind of story parents used to warn children about talking to strangers. But that had happened nearly 100 miles from here. Why would Lila Bishop's necklace be buried in the middle of Carson Dwyer's private forest? Matt's radio crackled to life, startling him. Gibson, you still out there? Storm's coming in fast. Better wrap it up for today. Matt pressed the talk button. Copy that. Just found something strange. I'll be heading back in 20. Strange how? His supervisor asked. Matt looked at the necklace in his palm, then at the perfectly rectangular pattern of trees surrounding him. The Bishop family hadn't disappeared randomly. They'd been here, hidden away in Carson Dwyer's private kingdom, far from prying eyes. I think I found something connected to that old missing persons case. The Bishop family. Static filled the channel for a moment. Then, bring whatever you found to the sheriff's office. Don't touch anything else. The wind picked up, sending leaves swirling around Matt's feet. Dark clouds gathered overhead, promising the forecasted downpour. But as he carefully placed the necklace in an evidence bag and packed up his equipment, Matt couldn't shake the feeling that he'd uncovered merely the edge of something much darker. The Bishop family hadn't just vanished. Based on where this necklace had been hidden, they'd been deliberately concealing themselves. The question was, what were they hiding from? And what did Carson Dwyer, the billionaire recluse who owned these woods, have to do with their disappearance? Thunder rumbled in the distance as Matt took one last look at the rectangle of trees. Whatever secret this place held had been buried for 23 years. But secrets, like bodies, had a way of surfacing when least expected. Sheriff's Deputy Carter Reeves examined the silver butterfly necklace under the fluorescent lights of the county records room. Matt Gibson stood beside him, muddy boots leaving traces on the linoleum floor. And you found this inside a tree? Carter asked, skepticism evident in his voice. At 32, he was young for his position, but the premature gray at his temples suggested the job had aged him beyond his years. In a metal box, hidden in a hollow oak, Matt confirmed. Right in the middle of what looked like an intentionally planted tree formation. Those trees were marking something. Carter nodded slowly. The Bishop case. I was just a kid when it happened, but my uncle worked the investigation. 4 people don't just vanish into thin air. He carefully placed the necklace back in its evidence bag. But this was found on Dwyer's property. Miles from their home? That's what bothered me too, Matt said. I think maybe we should check the land records. See if there's any connection between Carson Dwyer and the Bishops. The county archives were housed in the basement of the municipal building, a labyrinth of metal shelving units filled with leather-bound books and acid-free storage boxes. The digital age had largely bypassed this room, where property records dating back to the town's founding were still kept on paper and microfilm. The records clerk, a woman in her 60s named Dorothy, raised an eyebrow when Carter mentioned the Dwyer estate. Carson Dwyer bought up half the county back in the 90s, she said, pulling a thick binder from a shelf. Private man. Only dealt through lawyers. Most of his holdings were purchased through shell companies. She flipped through brittle pages filled with property transfers. What years are you looking for? 1999 to 2000, Matt answered. Around when the Bishop family disappeared. Dorothy's fingers moved with practiced efficiency through the documents. After 20 minutes of searching, she paused, tapping her finger on a deed transfer. Here's something. December 14, 1999. A small parcel, 5 acres, transferred from Harvey Bishop to Terra Nova Holdings, one of Dwyer's companies. She squinted at the faded type. The property is listed as undeveloped woodland with a hunting cabin. There's a notation that it was a private sale, no real estate agents involved. Carter leaned closer. 2 weeks before they vanished? Matt pulled out his survey maps and spread them across the table. Can you give me the coordinates or property description? Dorothy read off a series of numbers and boundary markers. Matt's finger traced across his map, stopping near the area he'd been surveying. It's here, he said quietly. The tree rectangle. It must have been their cabin. Carter frowned. So Harvey Bishop sold a small piece of property to Carson Dwyer, then 2 weeks later, his entire family disappeared? He shook his head. That's no coincidence. There's more. Dorothy interjected, pulling another file. There are no digital records for this property. When the county computerized records in 2005, this parcel doesn't appear in the database. It's like someone deliberately left it off the digital maps. Back in Carter's cruiser, the men studied the old survey maps Dorothy had photocopied for them. So we have a family that supposedly vanished, Matt said, but their property was secretly sold to a billionaire right before they disappeared. And then someone erased all digital traces of that connection. Either Dwyer was involved in making them disappear, Carter responded, starting the engine. Or he helped them disappear, Matt finished. The coordinates led them deep into the forest, a journey that took nearly an hour down overgrown fire roads and finally on foot through dense underbrush. The late afternoon sun filtered weakly through the trees as they approached the location Matt had discovered earlier. This time, with Carter's help and proper equipment, Matt was able to conduct a more thorough examination of the site. They cleared away years of forest debris to reveal what remained of a small cabin's foundation. The structure itself had collapsed long ago, rotted timbers half buried in the soil. "Look at this," Carter called, kneeling beside a section of collapsed wall. He carefully brushed dirt from a piece of weathered wood. "Built-in bookshelves. And there's something still here." Protected from the worst of the elements by the collapsed roof above it, a row of water-damaged books lined a partially intact shelf. Carter photographed everything before carefully removing the first volume, a high school biology textbook. Inside the cover, written in faded blue ink, "Property of Harvey Bishop, Burlington High School Science Department." "They were here," Matt whispered. "This proves it." Carter nodded grimly, continuing to document the scene. "Over here," he called moments later. "Photo albums." The plastic pages had fused together from years of moisture, but some images remained visible. A family of 4 at a lakeside picnic, school portraits of a boy and girl, Christmas mornings in a house that wasn't this cabin. Matt moved to what appeared to have been a small bathroom area, where porcelain fragments littered the ground. Between 2 rocks that had once supported a sink, he spotted a flash of color. Reaching down, he carefully extracted a child's drawing, remarkably preserved inside a plastic sleeve. The crayon sketch showed a small house surrounded by trees. At the bottom, in a child's careful handwriting, "Our forest home, Lila Bishop, 2005. Carter stared at Matt. 2005? That's 6 years after they supposedly disappeared, Matt said, his voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. "They weren't abducted. They were hiding," Carter finished, looking around at the collapsed cabin with new understanding. "The question is, hiding from what? Or whom?" As if in answer, something metallic glinted from beneath the rubble. A rusted mailbox, its door hanging open. Inside, protected from the elements, lay a leather-bound journal. Amelia Rourke sipped her black coffee, studying the silver butterfly necklace with intense concentration. At 68, the retired detective still possessed the sharp focus that had defined her 30-year career. Her gray hair was cut in a practical bob, her reading glasses perched on a chain around her neck. "I was a rookie when the Bishop case broke," she said, setting down her mug. "First major disappearance I ever worked. Never sat right with me how it just faded away." Carter had called Amelia the morning after their discovery. If anyone could make sense of the fragments they'd uncovered, it would be her. They had gathered in the sheriff's modest conference room, Matt, Carter, and Amelia, with the evidence spread across the table: the necklace, Harvey's journal, and photographs of everything they'd found at the cabin site. Amelia continued. "Harvey was having financial troubles. His wife had been treated for depression. But we never found bodies, never found their car. Nothing added up." She picked up the child's drawing dated 2005. "And now we know why. They were alive for years after they vanished." Matt pushed Harvey's journal toward her. "We haven't read through all of it yet. The handwriting gets shaky in places, and some pages are water damaged. But the first entry is dated January 3, 2000, 2 weeks after they disappeared." Amelia opened the journal carefully, its leather cover cracking slightly with age. She read aloud. We made it through the first 2 weeks. The children are adjusting better than expected. Marion cries at night when she thinks I'm asleep. I tell myself we made the right choice, that this was the only way to keep them safe. Dwyer's men delivered more supplies yesterday, enough to last through February. The fewer trips they make up here, the better. Ben asks when we can go home. How do I tell my son we can never go home again? Matt leaned forward. So Dwyer was helping them hide. But why? Amelia flipped through more pages, scanning entries. Here's something from February. Dwyer sent newspapers today. The search for us has been scaled back. My parents gave a tearful interview, begging for information. The guilt is unbearable, but they can never know. Their grief is the price of our safety. Carter poured more coffee. What was Harvey Bishop involved in that made him upend his entire family's existence? Amelia closed the journal, her expression thoughtful. Harvey wasn't just any science teacher. He was vocal about environmental issues, testified at town meetings, wrote letters to editors. I remember that from the investigation. She tapped her fingers on the table. We need to find out if he had any connection to Dwyer before the land sale. 3 hours later, the conference room walls were covered with improvised timeline charts and newspaper clippings Matt had printed from online archives. A pattern was emerging. Here, Matt said, pointing to a yellowed newspaper article. September 1999, 3 months before they disappeared. Harvey Bishop led a protest against waste dumping near Clearwater Stream, property owned by Terra Nova Holdings. Dwyer's company, Carter noted. And here, Matt continued, highlighting another article. Harvey filed a complaint with the State Environmental Agency, claiming illegal chemical disposal was contaminating groundwater near the high school. The agency found insufficient evidence after inspection. Amelia nodded slowly. Carson Dwyer had half the people in the state in his pocket back then. Those inspections would have been performative at best. According to this, Carter added, reading from a printed forum post. Harvey announced at a school board meeting that he was gathering water samples for independent testing. He mentioned potential legal action depending on the results. That was November 28, 1999, Amelia observed. 2 weeks later, he sold his cabin property to Dwyer. 2 weeks after that, the family vanished. Matt connected the dots. Harvey discovered something in those water tests, something damaging enough that Dwyer needed to make it go away. But instead of silencing Harvey permanently, Amelia continued, Dwyer offered him a deal. Carter nodded grimly. Your silence for your family's safety. They returned to the journal, finding an entry from March 2000. Dwyer visited today. First time since we moved here. Reminded me of our agreement. I'd bury the evidence, he keeps us buried but alive. Said the EPA investigation has been closed. His money works quickly. I asked how long we would have to live like this. He just laughed and said, How long do you want to live at all? Marion overheard. She hasn't spoken to me since. Amelia closed the journal gently. The family didn't just give up their home and identities. They sacrificed everything, friends, careers, extended family, because Harvey believed the threat was real. Was it? Matt asked. Was Dwyer capable of that level of intimidation? Amelia's expression hardened. Carson Dwyer built his fortune in the tech boom, but his family made their original money in less savory ways during Prohibition. He didn't just inherit wealth, he inherited connections and methods. In my career, I saw how men like him operate above the law. The question is, Carter said, what happened in 2006? The journal entries stop, and according to Lila's drawing, they were still here in 2005. But the cabin's been abandoned for years now. Matt picked up the butterfly necklace. And why would Lila leave this behind? It seems personal, important. Maybe she didn't leave it behind, Amelia said slowly. Maybe she left it to be found. A breadcrumb. Carter's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it, his expression shifting to surprise. That was from the State Forensics Lab. They found fingerprints on the journal that don't match Harvey or Marion Bishop. He looked up at them. They match Carson Dwyer's personal assistant, Thomas Mercer. He's still alive, living in Burlington. Well, Amelia said, standing with surprising agility for her age, I think Mr. Mercer and I are due for a conversation about his former employer. She gathered her coat, adding, when you force a family to disappear, you don't just erase their existence. You create ghosts that can haunt you long after you think they're gone. Thomas Mercer's hands trembled as he set down his teacup. His Burlington apartment overlooked Lake Champlain, a modest place for someone who had once managed the affairs of one of Vermont's wealthiest men. I was Carson's right hand for 27 years, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The things I did for him. He trailed off, glancing nervously at Amelia, who sat across from him with practiced patience. Matt and Carter flanked her, silent observers to her methodical questioning. They had arrived unannounced at Mercer's door that morning, armed with the journal and forensic evidence of his fingerprints. We're not here to pursue charges against you, Thomas, Amelia assured him. We just want to know what happened to the Bishop family. Mercer sighed deeply. Carson called them his forest project. I was responsible for deliveries, food, medicine, books for the children. Twice a month for years. He stared out the window. Harvey was supposed to be a simple problem to solve. Environmental activists usually accepted settlements, or other persuasion. But Harvey had evidence that could have cost Carson billions, water samples showing chemical contamination that could be traced directly to Carson's factories. So Dwyer made him disappear, Carter said. No, Mercer corrected. Dwyer gave him a choice. Vanish with his family and live under Carson's protection, or risk becoming an actual missing persons case. He looked down at his hands. I never knew if Carson would have actually harmed them. That uncertainty was the point. Harvey believed it enough to accept the deal. What happened in 2006? Matt asked. The journal stops. Mercer's expression darkened. Carson started making unscheduled visits to the cabin. He would go alone, which was unusual. By then, Parkinson's disease had begun affecting him, making him paranoid. He became convinced Harvey was secretly communicating with authorities. He hesitated. One night, Carson returned from the forest agitated, demanded I prepare documents for a property in Montana. A week later, the Bishops were gone from the cabin. You relocated them, Amelia realized. To protect them from Carson, Mercer nodded. He was losing his grip on reality. I feared what he might do. After leaving Mercer's apartment, the team regrouped at a nearby cafe. We need to search the cabin site more thoroughly, Carter decided. If Mercer is telling the truth, there might be evidence of where they went next. The following day, they returned to the collapsed cabin with additional equipment. A state police drone provided aerial imaging, revealing the full footprint of the former structure and its surroundings. The thermal sensors detected an anomaly, a cold spot beneath what would have been the cabin's stone hearth. Something's buried here, the drone operator confirmed, studying the readout. Carter and Matt carefully removed the flagstones, revealing a small metal container sealed with silicone. Inside lay another silver necklace, identical to Lila's butterfly, but engraved with Ben B. and a USB drive wrapped in plastic. That's not from 1999, Amelia observed, eyeing the USB. Someone's been back here more recently. At the sheriff's office, their tech specialist confirmed the USB drive contained encrypted files that had been created just last year. After hours of work, they were able to access the contents, a scanned property deed for a remote farm in western Montana, purchased in 2006 under the name Rachel Blythe, along with GPS coordinates and a short message. When it's safe. Rachel Blythe, Matt repeated. An anagram for Lila Bishop, rearranged with extra letters. Carson Dwyer died 14 months ago, Carter noted. His estate has been in probate, which is why the state only recently took possession of the forest land. And Lila waited a year after his death to leave her message, Amelia added. She wanted to be sure it was really over. 48 hours later, Matt and Amelia landed in Missoula, Montana. A local sheriff's deputy named Jensen met them at the airport, his expression grave. "The property you asked about is about 90 minutes from here," he explained as they drove. "Small farming community called Riverdale. Not much more than a general store and a post office. Rachel Blythe was well known there, kept to herself but helped with community events. Good neighbor." "Was?" Amelia asked sharply. "She left town 2 weeks ago," Jensen replied. "Right after some photographer showed up asking questions about long-time residents for a supposed book on rural communities. Folks said she seemed spooked." The farm sat nestled against the base of mountains, a modest house with several outbuildings and fenced pastures. A neighboring farmer had agreed to care for Rachel's chickens and goats after her abrupt departure. She said she might be gone a while. The neighbor, an elderly woman named Martha, told them. "Asked me to feed the animals until a friend came for them. Said she'd call when she was settled." "Did she mention where she was going?" Matt asked. Martha shook her head. "But she left this for anyone who came looking." She handed them a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one word. "Enough." "She knew someone would eventually follow her trail," Amelia said quietly. With the local sheriff's permission, they searched the house. It was tidy but clearly abandoned in haste, clothes still hanging in closets, food in the refrigerator. In the study, they found high school yearbooks from the years the Bishop children would have attended if they'd had normal lives, carefully preserved. A framed photograph on the nightstand showed a woman in her 30s standing beside an older man with a beard. Their faces were turned slightly away from the camera, as if avoiding full identification, but the family resemblance was unmistakable. "That's Lila and Harvey," Amelia confirmed. "Recent photo. He's alive, or was recently." Matt examined fingerprints lifted from the door frames and light switches. When the results came back, they confirmed what they already suspected. Rachel Blythe was indeed Lila Bishop. "She's running again," Matt said as they prepared to leave the farm. "But this time, she left breadcrumbs deliberately. She wanted us to know the truth. But not to find her," Amelia added. "Not yet." In the barn, tucked into a worn saddle, they discovered one final message, a thumb drive containing facial recognition photos of Carson Dwyer visiting the Montana property in 2018, taken by hidden security cameras Lila had installed. The truth became clear. Even decades later, Dwyer had continued to monitor his secret arrangement. Back in Vermont, the investigation team gathered in a conference room now wallpapered with evidence. Over 3 weeks had passed since Matt's discovery of the silver necklace, and the Bishop family mystery had consumed them entirely. "We have enough to go public," Carter argued, gesturing to the collected evidence. "People deserve to know what Carson Dwyer did to this family." Amelia shook her head. "We need to be careful. Dwyer might have passed away, but his empire isn't. His son controls the family holdings now. And there's still the question of what really happened to Marion Bishop," Matt added, pointing to a timeline they'd constructed. "No recent photos, no mention in Mercer's testimony beyond 2010. The team had pieced together a narrative from Harvey's journal, Mercer's testimony, and the evidence they'd gathered from both Vermont and Montana. The story was both simpler and more disturbing than the theories that had surrounded the Bishop family's disappearance for decades. Harvey had discovered that Dwyer's manufacturing plants were dumping carcinogenic chemicals into the water supply near Burlington High School. His water samples contained irrefutable evidence, enough to trigger massive lawsuits, regulatory penalties, and potentially criminal charges against Dwyer personally. When official channels failed him, Harvey had prepared to go public with his findings. That's when Carson Dwyer had approached him with a chilling proposition: disappear with your family and remain silent forever, or face deadly consequences. To ensure Harvey understood the threat, Dwyer had sent men to the Bishop home while the children were at school, men who made it clear what could happen to Ben and Lila if Harvey refused the deal. "He chose his family's safety over justice," Amelia said softly, reading from a recovered page of Harvey's journal. "I traded the truth for time with my children. Some would call me a coward. But watching Ben and Lila grow up, even in hiding, was worth more than becoming another forgotten environmental martyr. The most heartbreaking discovery had come from the Montana property, where Matt had found medical records hidden in a false bottom of a kitchen drawer. Marion Bishop had developed aggressive breast cancer in 2009, likely connected to the same chemical exposures Harvey had fought against. Without the ability to seek proper medical care under her real identity, she had died at home in 2012, buried on the Montana property under a simple stone marked only with her initials. It wasn't just their freedom Dwyer stole, Matt said, his voice tight with anger. He might as well have finished Marion himself. Carter's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it, then looked up sharply. The lab finished analyzing those soil samples we took from the cabin site. High levels of the same industrial chemicals Harvey documented in his original research. After all these years, the contamination is still present, which means his findings were accurate, Amelia concluded. Dwyer didn't just silence a potential lawsuit, he covered up a public health threat. Matt spread a map across the table. The contamination zone includes 3 schools and hundreds of homes. If we go public with this, it affects thousands of people. Carter nodded grimly. People who might have been drinking contaminated water for decades without knowing it. The room fell silent as the weight of their discovery settled over them. We need legal protection before we release this, Amelia finally said. I have a contact at the Attorney General's office in Burlington. Former colleague who owes me a favor. 3 days later, state environmental officials descended on the former Dwyer properties with testing equipment and hazmat suits. News helicopters circled overhead as residents demanded answers. The story broke across local media before spreading to national outlets. Vanished family's 23-year mystery linked to environmental cover-up. Amelia appeared at a press conference alongside the Attorney General, her posture ramrod straight as she detailed their findings. She carefully avoided mentioning Lila's current whereabouts or the likelihood that Harvey and Ben Bishop were still alive. Instead, she focused on the documented evidence, the journals, the land transfers, the chemical testing results, and Thomas Mercer's sworn testimony. The Bishop family were not criminals or runaways, she stated firmly. They were victims of corporate power wielded without conscience, ordinary citizens forced to sacrifice their lives to protect their children from a threat the authorities of that time failed to recognize.